Do you remember Kurt Cobain? The reluctant prophet of a generation whose voice shook the world, even as his own life was silently falling apart. But behind the chaos of Nirvana's fame was a man trapped between addiction, trauma, and a destiny he was terrified to fulfill. And even more shocking, the final days of his life remain wrapped in contradictions, missing pieces, and a darkness the world still can't explain. How could the man who became a symbol of rebellion feel powerless inside his own story? Unseen evidence, rare recordings, and long-buried truths will surface in this video. Stay until the end to uncover why Kurt Cobain's death remains one of the most haunting mysteries in music history. Before the world saw Kurt Cobain as a voice of a generation, he was just a fragile, deeply sensitive boy growing up in the quiet, gray towns of Aberdeen, Washington, a place soaked in rain, silence, and unspoken pain. And inside that small town lived a child who felt everything too intensely, long before he had words to explain it. Kurt was born into a family that looked normal from the outside. A hard-working mechanic father, a warm but overwhelmed mother, a close-knit small-town life. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Cracks that would eventually shape the man, the music, and the tragedy the world now remembers. When Kurt was 9, his parents divorced, an event he later described as the moment his world collapsed. Most children struggle with divorce. Kurt shattered. He wasn't just sad, he was devastated. He felt abandoned, unwanted, and fundamentally broken. He wrote later in his journals, "I remember feeling embarrassed, ashamed, like I had done something wrong." The divorce wasn't a single event. It was a lifelong wound. After the split, his mother entered an abusive relationship. His father became emotionally distant. Relatives moved him from home to home, and Kurt felt like a burden everywhere he went. He didn't belong anywhere. Not to a home, not to a parent, not to a family. This sense of rootlessness, of being unwanted, became the foundation of Kurt's lifelong emotional pain. Even before the chaos, Kurt was extremely sensitive. He drew constantly. He sang to himself. He watched people with uncanny intuition, absorbing emotions like a sponge. But the world around him, masculine, working class, dismissive of emotion, treated sensitivity as weakness. Kurt didn't fit in. He wasn't athletic. He wasn't loud. He wasn't a normal boy. He was too soft for a hard environment, bullied for his size, mocked for his gentle demeanor, ignored by adults who didn't understand him. He learned early to hide his tears, to swallow emotions, to pretend. Pretending would later become a pattern. Smile on stage, suffer alone. During these years, Kurt found one place where he felt safe: art. He drew obsessively, surreal, dark images filled with symbolism. He listened to music for hours. He created imaginary worlds to escape the real one. But this wasn't a hobby. It was survival. Kurt didn't have emotional safety. He had creative release, and that release is what kept him afloat. Music wasn't something he discovered. It was something he needed. As he grew older, the loneliness hardened into anger, not the loud, explosive anger people expected, but a quiet, smoldering rage directed inward, at his father for leaving, at his mother for choosing abusive partners, at himself for feeling broken, at a world that seemed blind to his pain. This internal conflict later shaped Kurt's unique sound. Soft voice, explosive scream, fragile whisper, raw confession. He wasn't performing emotion. He was releasing it. By high school, Kurt had drifted between relatives so often that he was practically homeless. He slept on friends' couches, sometimes under bridges, sometimes in hallways. One classmate remembered he carried a notebook like it was the only thing he owned. Another said Kurt looked like he was here and somewhere else at the same time. But there was one constant: the cheap, worn guitar he carried everywhere. He poured all of himself into it. Every fear, every memory, every scar. The boy who felt invisible discovered the one thing that made him feel real. Kurt Cobain wasn't shaped by fame. He was shaped by childhood wounds that never healed. The world later worshipped his vulnerability, his rawness, his honesty. But those traits weren't artistic choices. They were emotional consequences. By the time Nirvana was formed, the tragedy had already begun. Not with drugs, not with fame, not with pressure, but with a boy who learned too early that love could break, that families could disappear, and that some hearts carry storms they never deserved. Kurt didn't become a troubled genius. He was born one, and the world would soon hear what a wounded soul sounds like when it finally finds a microphone. As Kurt moved through adolescence, the world around him felt increasingly hostile. A place that didn't understand him, didn't want him, and didn't know what to do with someone made of such fragile intensity. Music became the only safe language he had, the only space where nothing hurt. He played his guitar not like a student, but like someone trying to stitch wounds closed with sound. Every chord was a confession. Every lyric was a bruise shaped into melody. By the time he reached his late teens, Kurt wasn't merely passionate about music. He was consumed by it. Kurt discovered punk rock the way some people discover religion. Suddenly, completely, and with a sense of belonging he had never felt in real life. Bands like the Melvins, Black Flag, Mudhoney, and the Stooges didn't just influence him, they validated him. Punk wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It didn't care about fame, success, or social approval. It was raw emotion, unfiltered pain, rebellion against everything that made sensitive kids feel small. For Kurt, it felt like home. He began attending local shows, standing quietly in the back, absorbing the chaos like fuel. In the noise, he didn't feel invisible anymore. He felt understood. Kurt formed several small bands in his youth, Fecal Matter being the earliest. The music was rough, distorted, unrefined, but there was something there, something unmistakable, something dangerous and beautiful. Kurt wasn't writing songs to impress anyone. He was writing songs because he didn't know how to survive without them. He filled notebook after notebook with drawings, surreal imagery, confessional poems, lyrics soaked in emotional violence, thoughts about death, loneliness, and identity. His creativity wasn't controlled. It was eruptive, a pressure valve for a mind that felt too much all the time. In the mid-1980s, Kurt met Chris Novoselic, another outsider, another misfit, another kid from Aberdeen searching for something beyond the gray skies and broken families. Chris was tall, mellow, gentle, the opposite of Kurt's tense, quiet storm. But opposites made balance. And in Chris, Kurt finally found something he had never truly had before. A friend who understood him without needing explanations. They shared cassettes, talked about music for hours, skipped school to rehearse, spent nights experimenting with sounds in dingy basements and borrowed garages. And without realizing it, they were shaping the foundation of a band that would one day set the world on fire. Nirvana didn't begin as a dream of fame, success, or revolution. It began as two broken kids trying to survive their own minds. When they recruited drummers, going through several before eventually meeting Dave Grohl, something clicked emotionally and musically. Grohl's drumming wasn't just powerful. It was primal, cathartic, and perfectly aligned with Kurt's explosive songwriting. The trio wasn't simply a band. It was a storm system. Kurt's fragile intensity, Chris' grounding presence, Dave's ferocious energy. Together, they created something that felt alive, a sound that was too honest, too raw, too emotional to be ignored. Aberdeen didn't prepare the world for Nirvana. Nothing did. When they began performing in small venues, the reaction was unexpected. People didn't just like the music. They felt it, the distortion, the vulnerability, the anger, the ache. It was entertainment. It was a mirror, a voice for every outsider, every misfit, every quiet kid drowning inside their own mind. Kurt had finally found a way to make the world hear what he had been feeling his entire life. But with every show, every rehearsal, every new song, something else was forming beneath the surface, a tension between Kurt's artistic soul and the fame that would soon suffocate him. He dreamed of being seen, but he wasn't ready for what being seen would cost. Nirvana wasn't meant to be a global success. They were a group of wounded souls making music because they didn't know how to exist without it. But brilliance attracts attention. Authenticity attracts worship. And Kurt's vulnerability, the very trait that made him suffer, became the heartbeat of a band destined to explode into the mainstream. The rise was beginning. The world was listening. And Kurt Cobain, for the first time, felt both alive and terrified. Because the thing he had always wanted, connection, was about to become the thing that destroyed him. By 1990, Nirvana was no longer just a local secret. Their sound, strange, raw, unpolished, painfully honest, was beginning to carve a hole through the underground scene. But nothing could have prepared Kurt Cobain for what would happen next. He had spent his childhood feeling invisible. Now the world couldn't stop looking at him. Nirvana signed with DGC Records and released Nevermind in 1991. No one expected much. Not Kurt, not the band, not the label. Then Smells Like Teen Spirit hit MTV. And everything changed. Instantly, violently, permanently. The song didn't just become a hit. It became an explosion. A generation of young people who felt numb, misunderstood, repressed, suddenly heard a voice that matched their anger and sadness. Kurt Cobain became that voice, reluctantly, painfully. Nevermind dethroned Michael Jackson on the charts. Nirvana became the hottest band in the world. Kurt became a legend at 24. But legends come with consequences. Kurt never wanted fame. Not like this. Not with cameras in his face, reporters twisting his words, fans screaming his name with a desperation that felt more like hunger than admiration. He loved music. He hated the machine around it. Interviews exhausted him. Publicity felt fake. Award shows were torture. He described fame as being dragged into a spotlight you never asked for. And with fame came pressure, a pressure Kurt was psychologically unprepared for. To perform, to promote, to explain his art, to speak for an entire generation, to pretend he was stable when he was falling apart. The world saw a rock star. Kurt felt like a trapped child all over again. The media adored Nirvana's success, but despised Kurt's refusal to play the fame game. He wouldn't dress like a star. He wouldn't act like a star. He wouldn't pretend. To journalists, that made him difficult. To Kurt, it made him honest. The press began attacking him, calling him unstable, calling him a junkie, calling him dangerous, speculating about his marriage, dissecting every lyric for scandal. Kurt wasn't just famous. He was exposed, stripped of privacy, turned into a symbol. Symbols don't get to have boundaries. As Nirvana's influence spread, Kurt's songwriting grew darker. Songs like Rape Me, Heart-Shaped Box, and All Apologies revealed a mind unraveling in real time, a soul suffocating under pressure, being worshipped and misunderstood at the same time. Fans saw a genius. Critics saw chaos. Kurt saw pain. He once said, "I'm too sensitive for this shit." And he was right. His sensitivity, his greatest artistic strength, was now being weaponized against him by the world. Fame didn't make Kurt Cobain powerful. It made him fragile. It fed every wound he had. Childhood abandonment, rejection, loneliness, need for connection, fear of being misunderstood, emotional instability. Suddenly, millions of people projected their emotions onto him. Millions expected him to lead, to speak, to heal them. He couldn't heal himself. The louder the world screamed his name, the quieter Kurt became. Internally, Kurt felt exhausted, guilty, overwhelmed, undeserving, responsible for other people's pain. Externally, he faced endless touring, rapid-fire interviews, tabloids attacking his marriage with Courtney Love, criticism of his heroin use, backlash from conservative groups, pressure from the label, pressure from fans, pressure from himself. Kurt didn't want to be a leader. He didn't want to be an icon. He wanted to be left alone, to create, to breathe, to exist. He once told a friend, "I don't know how much longer I can do this." At the height of his success, Kurt Cobain was already breaking. By late 1992, early 1993, Kurt's fame had become a monster, one that consumed everything it touched: his privacy, his health, his marriage, his sanity. He tried to fight back with art, but art wasn't enough. Music couldn't drown the noise anymore. And as Nirvana continued to rise, Kurt began to fall. The world saw a legend. Kurt saw a cage he would spend the rest of his short life trying desperately to escape. Fame did not destroy Kurt Cobain overnight. It eroded him slowly, quietly, like water carving its way through stone. Each interview, each performance, Each headline added another crack to a soul already fractured long before Nirvana ever existed. By the early 1990s, Kurt was fighting a war on multiple fronts. A war against his body, his mind, the media, his past, and a future he never asked for. And little by little, the war began to win. Long before heroin entered the picture, Kurt lived with chronic physical pain, an undiagnosed stomach condition that caused unbearable nausea, burning, and internal spasms. Doctors couldn't explain it. Therapies didn't work. Kurt once said, "The pain was so intense I couldn't eat or sleep. Heroin was the only thing that helped." To many, his addiction looked like recklessness. To Kurt, it felt like survival. Painkillers dulled the agony in his stomach. Heroin dulled the agony in his mind. It was never about escape. It was about relief. Kurt battled depression long before the world knew his name. But fame magnified it. The noise, the pressure, the scrutiny, the responsibility of being a voice of a generation he never wanted to represent. Depression didn't scream inside him. It whispered, "You're not enough. You're an imposter. You don't deserve love. You don't deserve happiness. You don't belong here." That whisper grew louder with every passing month. The press became Kurt's harshest enemy. They attacked his heroin use, his marriage, his parenting, his mental health, his authenticity, his masculinity. Tabloids called him unstable, dangerous, a junkie unfit for fame. Every headline felt like a wound. Every article felt like betrayal. Kurt's sensitivity, the same vulnerability that made his music profound, became ammunition for journalists eager to build stories from his misery. He wasn't designed for this kind of scrutiny, and it broke him. His relationship with Courtney Love was explosive, passionate, chaotic, and deeply misunderstood. To outsiders, it looked toxic. To insiders, it was two fragile people holding on to each other as the world tried to tear them apart. But love cannot always heal what trauma destroys. Both battled addiction. Both battled pressure. Both battled demons. Their marriage became a mirror reflecting the worst in each of them. Not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much, too intensely. The media turned them into villains. Kurt internalized every narrative, and the spiral tightened. Heroin was not Kurt's rebellion. It was his anesthesia. It gave him calm, silence, focus, relief from physical pain, temporary escape from emotional collapse. But it also took his energy, his clarity, his relationships, his stability, his ability to create without suffering. Addiction wasn't the monster. It was a result of the monster. Kurt didn't choose heroin over life. He chose heroin over agony. That distinction matters. Those closest to Kurt describe a man who lived in constant contradiction. He wanted to tour but was overwhelmed by crowds. He wanted privacy but needed connection. He wanted to be a father but hated himself too much to feel worthy. He wanted to live but couldn't endure the pain of living. He wanted help but didn't trust anyone to understand him. He once said, "I hate myself and I want to die." People dismissed it as dark humor. It wasn't. It was an autobiographical confession of a soul cracking under pressure. By early 1994, Kurt's inner circle tried to intervene. Friends, bandmates, Courtney, all begged him to get help. Kurt resisted. He felt attacked, cornered, misunderstood. Interventions don't always feel like rescue. Sometimes they feel like judgment. Eventually, Kurt agreed to enter rehab, but his heart wasn't in it. He felt abandoned. He felt trapped. He felt alone. And that feeling would follow him all the way to the end. Kurt fled the rehab facility in California by scaling a 6-foot fence. The imagery is haunting. A famous rock star, a global icon, a father, a husband, a broken man climbing a fence like a prisoner escaping captivity. But he wasn't escaping rehab. He was escaping everything. The pressure, the expectations, the pain he carried from childhood, the monster fame had become. He returned to Seattle without telling anyone. Less than a week later, he would be gone. In the final weeks before his death, Kurt was a paradox. He laughed with friends. He played with his daughter. He talked about the future. He wrote songs. He made plans. But he also isolated for long stretches, spiraled into depressive thoughts, used more heavily, spoke about disappearing, felt unworthy of love, felt like a burden on everyone he cared about. Kurt wasn't choosing death. He was losing a battle he had been fighting since childhood. A battle between a brilliant mind and a wounded heart, between an artist who wanted to save the world and a child who never learned to save himself. Kurt Cobain's final days were not a dramatic collapse, nor a sudden descent into chaos. They were quiet, too quiet, a stillness that felt less like peace and more like exhaustion, the kind of heaviness that settles over someone who's been fighting for far too long. By late March 1994, Kurt was no longer battling fame, the media, or the expectations placed upon him. He was battling himself, and he was losing. After years of emotional and physical pain, Kurt reluctantly entered a rehab facility in California. Those around him hoped it was a turning point. They wanted him to recover. They wanted him to live. But Kurt didn't feel saved. He felt trapped. He was kind to staff, polite, soft-spoken, quiet, too quiet. A few days later, he climbed over the facility's fence and disappeared. It wasn't the act of a rebellious rock star. It was the act of a broken man searching for control. Even if for just a moment, he bought a plane ticket to Seattle under his own name, as if he no longer cared who saw him. And then he vanished. When Kurt returned to Seattle, he didn't call friends. He didn't call Chris or Dave. He didn't call his mother. He didn't call Courtney. Instead, he moved to the city like a shadow, a man both present and absent, alive and fading. People later reported seeing him, walking alone near a park, wandering through a store in silence, sitting quietly on a bench, head lowered. He wasn't frantic or wild. He was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that terrifies people who understand mental health. It was the calm of someone who had made a decision. The most heartbreaking part of Kurt's final days was a conflict inside him regarding his daughter, Frances Bean Cobain. He loved her fiercely, protectively, tenderly. Those who saw him with her said he softened in a way he didn't with anyone else. But Kurt also believed, wrongly, tragically, that he was a burden, that he was not good enough to be a father, that his pain would eventually harm her, that leaving might protect her. These thoughts weren't rational. They were the thoughts of a man crushed beneath untreated depression, addiction, and years of emotional wounds. His final letter, regardless of which parts are debated, echoed the same sentiment. A man who felt unworthy of the people he loved. On April 5th, Kurt retreated to a room above his detached garage, a small, quiet space filled with sunlight, shadows, instruments, and memories. We do not describe graphic details here, only what is emotionally true. At some point during that day, Kurt Cobain died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 27 years old, a brilliant, wounded soul who changed the world with his honesty, gone before he ever learned how to live with that honesty. Kurt's body wasn't discovered until April 8th, 3 days later, by an electrician arriving to install security lighting. For those who loved him, the realization was shattering. Kurt had been alone, alone in his pain, alone in his fear, alone in his final moment. The world mourned a legend, but those close to him mourned a gentle, quiet, deeply sensitive man they could not save. When the news broke, it felt unreal. Fans collapsed in tears. Radio stations stopped their programming. MTV went silent before airing a tribute. Grunge musicians gathered in disbelief. Journalists scrambled to understand the tragedy they had helped amplify. Vigils formed across Seattle. Candles, handwritten notes, flowers, photos, guitars left beneath the April rain. Thousands stood silently as Nirvana's music echoed through the city like a lament. Some cried openly. Others whispered his lyrics. Many simply stared at the ground, unable to process the enormity of the loss. Kurt wasn't just another rock star. He was the emotional voice of millions who felt broken in their own quiet ways. And now he was gone. Kurt's death was officially ruled a suicide. But from the very beginning, questions swirled. Inconsistencies in reports. The amount of drugs in his system. The timeline of his disappearance. Conflicting statements from people around him. Whether these theories hold truth or not, one fact remains. Kurt Cobain lived a life that the world romanticized, but never fully understood. And in that misunderstanding, the mystery of his final days only deepened. Kurt Cobain did not die because he didn't care. He died because he cared too much, felt too deeply, hurt too intensely, and lived in a world that demanded more from him than he could give. He was a man who turned pain into beauty, chaos into music, suffering into a generation's anthem. But he could not escape the wounds carved into him long before fame ever found him. April 5th, 1994, became one of the darkest days in rock music, not because a star died, but because a gentle, brilliant, haunted human being, one who never felt worthy of love, was swallowed by a storm he had battled since childhood. The world lost Kurt Cobain. Francis lost a father. Courtney lost a husband. Chris and Dave lost a brother. Millions lost a voice that said everything they were afraid to say. And the music world was never the same again. When the world learned that Kurt Cobain had died, it was not just another tragic headline. It was a cultural earthquake. Millions of people who had never met him felt as if they had lost someone who understood them more deeply than anyone in their real lives. The voice that had spoken their pain aloud had gone silent. Shock was immediate. Grief was global. News stations interrupted programming. Radio DJs choked up mid-sentence. MTV replayed Nirvana performances with no commentary, just silence between songs, as if words had suddenly become useless. Across America, teenagers sat in their bedrooms crying into pillows, blasting Nirvana at full volume. Across Europe, crowds gathered in public squares, lighting candles and sharing stories of how Kurt had saved their lives without ever knowing their names. Kurt Cobain didn't just make music. He made millions feel seen. And now those millions felt abandoned. Seattle transformed overnight. At the Seattle Center, thousands arrived carrying candles, handwritten letters, drawings of Kurt, guitars with lyrics scribbled on them, photos from concerts, torn denim jackets, flowers soaked by the cold April rain. People stood quietly, shoulder to shoulder, humming all apologies, something in the way, "Come as you are." Some sobbed openly. Some stared ahead in disbelief. Some held each other without speaking a word. A young fan was heard whispering. He was the only one who understood us. Seattle had lost a son. The world had lost its voice. Musicians from every genre expressed devastation. Michael Stipe called him a comet. Eddie Vedder said he felt like a brother had died. Billy Corgan admitted he cried for days. Dave Grohl could barely speak. His grief was too raw, too personal. Even artists who had never met him said they felt the world shift that day. Kurt didn't just influence musicians. He altered the emotional vocabulary of an entire decade. He made vulnerability powerful. He made brokenness poetic. He made silence loud. Almost immediately, theories spread around Kurt's death. Fueled by inconsistencies, emotional shock, and a public unwilling to accept that someone who gave so much could be suffering so deeply. Documentaries emerged. Books were written. Investigations were reopened and re-questioned. But beneath the speculation lies a simpler truth. The world didn't want to believe Kurt Cobain left because of pain. They wanted another explanation. Any explanation that didn't break their hearts. The theories say less about Kurt and more about the people who love him too much to accept the reality. Kurt Cobain changed music, but his deepest legacy is emotional, not artistic. He gave permission for men to feel. He gave language to the voiceless. He stood up for LGBTQ youth, feminists, and outsiders long before it was popular, because he understood what being excluded felt like. He fought against bigotry publicly, aggressively, fearlessly. He was flawed, but he was real, and realness is rare. Realness becomes immortal. Today, decades after his death, you can still hear Kurt's influence everywhere, in artists who whisper their pain, in songs shaped by vulnerability, in the unapologetic rawness of modern rock, in kids wearing flannel shirts who weren't even born when he died. Kurt Cobain didn't live to see his impact, but the world he left behind still feels the shockwave of his voice. He didn't want to be a hero. He didn't try to be a legend. He became both, simply by being honest. When people remember Kurt Cobain, they don't remember the chaos or the headlines or the endless theories that followed his death. They remember the fragility, the gentleness, the way his voice cracked on stage as if every word carried the weight of a lifetime he never had the chance to fully live. Kurt wasn't a myth or a martyr. He was a wounded soul trying to make sense of a world that never felt like home. And in doing so, he gave a generation the language to describe its own pain. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't unbreakable. He wasn't the invincible rock god people projected onto him. He was human, painfully, beautifully human. He felt too deeply, loved too intensely, hurt too quietly. And in the end, the world demanded more from him than he ever had to give. But his legacy was never meant to be a tragic ending. It lies in the echoes of his music, in the people he saved without knowing, in the honesty he carved into rock history with nothing but guitar, a whisper, and a storm in his heart. Kurt Cobain may have left the world at 27, but the vulnerability he offered, the courage to feel, to break, to bleed through art, remains alive in millions. Some legends are remembered for what they built. Kurt Cobain is remembered for what he revealed. And in that revelation, he became eternal.